Greetings. Today what we're going to do is practice our analog thrusters landing on a high G planet. What do I mean by a high G planet? In this case, we're talking about any planet with a gravity of higher than 1.5 Gs. This is a particularly dangerous area, especially if you are in a large anaconda with 5D thrusters as I'm currently using. So what we have here is a 3.39 G planet, and we're going to try and put down on it as best we can. We're going to do this in an anaconda with 127 tons of limpets, fully cargo laden. Our jump range here is about 28, 5D thrusters. And that's about it. Let's get a little bit closer and we'll pick up the next step. Now that we've entered orbital cruise, we want to try and keep our attitude at about -20 to -25 degrees. It's not for any real reason other than to make sure that when we exit orbital cruise, we are at a good attitude. If we drop below -60, obviously we drop right out of orbital cruise. While we are in orbital cruise, we're not really in any danger of falling down onto the planet and destroying our ship. We have a lot of room to go. The goal here is, when we drop out of orbital cruise, to be at about -20. The reason you want to find yourself there is so that you're not falling too fast once you drop. Now that we're dropping out of orbital cruise, we want to keep glide going to bring us down towards the surface as much as possible. Ideally, we want glide to kind of go away at about the 5-kilometer height. We want to keep our attitude where it is, between -15 and -20. Right now, I've got -17. And just as glide is starting to finish out, I pull up a little bit just to make sure my attitude is at the mark I wanted. Readjust, right back to -15, and now we just need to get a little bit closer to the surface. There's a couple of things here to keep in mind. The first is that while you are moving forward, we need to make sure that we are not dropping too quickly. The meter that you have on the right-hand side that shows you how fast you're dropping is vitally important for us. On a high G world, when you have low thrusters, you do not want to really drop more than 3 markers. If you are dropping below that, you might be dropping a little bit too fast and you need to be careful. Now that we've hit the 2-kilometer mark, this is where I'm going to level out and I'm going to make sure that the ship is capable of keeping itself upright. Throttle all the way down to 0, level myself out, and make sure that we're not dropping. There's no change in altitude. There's no change in attitude. This is important because on some ships you still have a little bit of a drop. It also gives you a good idea of whether or not you even have any problems. You still have enough room to turn it around. In this case, no dropping. We're good. On to the surface. We're going to continue with our attitude at about -10 to -15. Once we get down to about the 1.7 kilometers, I'm getting ready to drop my landing gear. I'm leveling myself out. I'm already aiming for a good place. Landing gear down now, it does 2 things. One, obviously, it gets me ready for landing on the surface. The other thing it does is that it cuts my speed in half. It's the best air brake when there's no air to brake against. We're going to find a nice spot to land. At about the 1-kilometer mark, I'm just leveling myself out. And I'm just, once the ground radar is up, I'm looking for a decent place to land. Here's where things get a little bit different. What we need to do is make sure that our vertical speed is never too high. There's a couple of ways to do that, especially if you have a HOTAS with an analog axis. If you have an analog axis, you can go ahead and map it. Now, what I have is the CH Fighter Stick. It's got a throttle axis that for the most part is kind of useless unless you don't have the CH Pro throttle, which I also do. Now, a lot of people like using the mini stick when it comes to this kind of landing, but I don't recommend it. The mini stick has a tendency to slip, and suddenly you're thrusting downward much faster than you intended. Instead, what we're going to do is use the axes. With the axes, we have finer control, especially after a quick little CMS script that I whipped up that locks the maximum output of the axes at about 8%. And that's what we're seeing here. I've got my axes all the way to full, but I'm only descending at about 5 meters per second. Any faster than that, and I find it in Anaconda, does not give me the control I need to be able to suddenly stop, right? If I throttled back down to 0 to stop myself from landing, I'm only going to lose a couple meters. If you have a X52 or X52 Pro stick and throttle, what you can do is use the dial that's on top of the throttle. This is an analog axis as well. Now, in this case, we're just kind of measuring out, making sure that the area that we're trying to land on is a good one, but this is a slow descent. We don't want to land too quickly. We land too quickly, bad things happen. Landing on a high G planet means two things, especially in an Anaconda with 5D thrusters. One, you are landing more like a plane than you are a spaceship, and two, you need some patience. Now that we've verified that we're over some decent terrain, we're going to continue our descent. Watch my shields here. Even though we're on a high G planet and I've got 4D shields, I'm going to lose a good chunk of shields here. There you go. I lost about 1 ring of the shields, but there was no damage to the modules. There was no damage to the hull. I'm perfectly fine and down, and I did not have to use flight assist off. And that's how to put down on a high G planet with analog thrusters. I really recommend that you use this method over FA off. The main problem that you're going to have with FA off is that it's an uncontrolled descent, and you're going to smack onto that planet's surface. This gives you a lot more control. You're not falling at that faster rate. Your thrusters are never going to give up. This is a pretty heavy ship with pretty weak thrusters, and we did just fine. That's all for today. I hope you found this useful, and I hope to see you out in the black.